do a damn thing. Fictions don't have the ability to create.
Create, I agree, they can't create. But if you've been following what Matthew says, he says the fiction can't own anything. I said, that's not true. Fictions can own things. They have, property is nothing more. What people don't understand about property is they think of the house, the car, the phone as property. No, the tangible item is not property. It's your rights and interest in the property. Now, the question is are you the only one that has rights and interest?
Well, so that's another question. It would seem to me that others may have rights.
You contracted with them to be your supervisor. That's what I'm saying. Is you have the way I follow you is you have to get out of that. You have to tell them that you are a living person. I remember you saying that.
No, not necessarily a living person, because people like to go into court and say, I'm the living man. Duh. You're stating the obvious. That's not going to fix it.
Well, there's also a problem, too, in that there is no living person. A person is a fiction as well. Look up person in Black's Law. I can assure you that a man and a person are two entirely different things.
Man and person, right? Man, and yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so and the thing is, too.
So you stating you're the living man, you're stating the obvious. They know you're living. The problem isn't that you're living. The problem is you don't know who you are in relation to that name.
Exactly.
That's what nobody's expressing, is their relationship to that name. By the way, Popeye, I had something come up, just hit me the other day, a mental thought.
Okay.
What does the Bible say? What name is all the power in?
Yes, I am a
the
minor.
Name of
yes.
Jesus. No, the name
Jesus
of
Christ.
Jesus Christ. All the power is in that name, right? Wasn't that name you used created in sin?
I believe so.
Because why? Both mother and father are what? They're of the sinful line of Adam. That means it was created in sin. There is no power in that name. It's actually all the liability, because sin is a debt according to not only them, but to God. Hello, Amber. Nice of you to join.
Hey, Amber. Well, Tony, one of the things that has to be kept in mind in all of this is, like I was saying before, that you as the living, breathing man, not a person, but there's a living, breathing man, are the only real party in interest. There is no other living, breathing men or women involved anywhere, despite the fact that, yes, the so-called agent for whoever might be sitting in front of you in their private capacity. Yes, they're a living, breathing man. They absolutely are living, breathing man or woman. But in their present capacity as a so-called agent for whatever company or corporation they're claiming to work for, they're a dead entity. They cannot exceed the capacity of the principle for which they are claiming to represent.
Correct.
The principle is always a piece of paper with ink on it, which is not of legal capacity. It does not have the ability to discuss with you to come to what is known as a meeting of the minds. So that being said, again, this is where you, as the only real party in interest on anything, you have a choice. Because there is, technically speaking, there is no such thing as rights such as the so-called Bill of Rights, in the sense that government is giving you this line of things where you have the ability to do it regardless and you're completely unattached. That's not really true. The only thing that you have is a choice as to whether or not you want to contract with somebody calling themselves GovCo. That's all you really have, is a choice of whether or not you want to contract with them. That's it.
Now, here's now go back. What was the purpose of government? I mean,
initially it was to protect the rights of the individual.
And to secure your rights and interests. Now, how did they do that? And this is what people miss. This is what the majority of the people miss. Go read the Declaration of Independence. It's actually not the Declaration of Independence. It's actually called a declaration. If you go into the file section, you can find a copy of it called a declaration. There was only 200 copies of that printed by the government in 1776. Okay. The Declaration of Independence is a styles issue. Okay. Go read the last paragraph. See, that thing is a trust indenture. What did the grantors do? The grantors pledged all their honor, their property, their fortunes to the trust. The rules they had to develop for the trustees, we call that the Constitution. That's why the government will call themselves trustees. So if they're supposed to secure your rights and interest, which is property, how did they do it? They put everything into trust. That means the trustees are the obligor. That means you're not the grantor, you're not the trustees, and you're not the beneficiaries. The only thing you can be is the general or registered agent. Now, Amber, to the question on what I posted on your video on the UCC, I'm not saying 100% that the UCC is wrong. The problem I have is this. If that name isn't yours and that name is their property, because it plainly says it on the back of the social that it's their property, did you do an administrative process to secure your rights and interests? Most people know. How did you prove that they owe you a debt? Tony, you're driving, ain't you?
How do you know? I was just charging my Bluetooth and I got to.
Yeah, just mute yourself for a minute because of the background noise.
Yeah, I'm gonna fix that. Yeah.
I'm driving too. I got a Blue Parrot headset. If you've got the money to get one, they're worth every penny.
Blue Parrot, huh?
Yes. I got a 450, I've got a 550, and overhead I got a 650. The 650 is for my iPad when I do Zooms. The 450 and 550, when one goes dead, I switch it for the other one.
Okay.
So that way I've got a constant headset to charge, because being a truck driver, I kind of have to have that. Now, Amber, the reason why that name is not yours is, one, you have no firsthand knowledge that's your name. Okay. And everybody always says, well, my mother gave it to me. Well, technically that may be true, but that's still not firsthand knowledge.
Right.
There is a document that the CDC put out listing all 50 states, talking about the 3 products of conception. Now, my question, Amber, is do you have children?
I do.
Okay, when you were giving birth, would you consider yourself competent? You would consider yourself anything but competent, right?
Especially at the moment of birth.
Yes. Look, if men had to give birth, we would have developed cloning before fire.
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah.
I am honest about it, because why? We can't handle pain like women can. Hell no, not that kind of pain. Now, you have 3 products of conception. You have a placenta, you have an umbilical cord, and you have a baby. If you go back and read your footprint documents for your baby, right? There's a paragraph on the footprint document that says you verified the information and you received your baby. But guess what typically gets left at the hospital? The umbilical cord and the placenta. And through operation of law, the hospital can only record what is in their possession.
Salvage items.
That's right. Guess who never got registered? You.
The actual baby.
So how do you register your children? Or do you want to? Because is that not giving them away?
Actually, no. I actually found something the other day that there is an option to register the baby, and I'm thinking it's really what you should do. Possibly. It's called a delayed registration. The whole thing of the delayed registration, there are different rules involved. Yeah, now whether or not you want to, that's each individual's choice. But if you register the baby, you need to express your intent. And that's what nobody's doing is, you've heard the term express the trust. Well, how do you express it? You write your contract and contract with your government.
Now, personally, I am of the opinion, and this is just my own opinion, but I would not register any children. And simply put, it's been my estimation based on all of my experience that anytime you do anything such as that, you essentially create a ward of the court by doing so. Even in the essence of getting a so-called marriage license, that creates you and the other party as wards of the court, and any offspring that come from that relationship also become wards of the court based on what I've read. So that being said, the last thing I would want to be is a ward of the court. I caution people about that and citizenship because of all the things that are attached to being a so-called citizen. And it's almost as bad as claiming that name.
Well, Papa, as much as I agree with what you're saying, there's also another side to that. You know, the Bible says you can't serve two masters.
Oh, exactly.
That means you cannot be a U.S. citizen, and you can't be a citizen of the state and be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven.
Well, there you go. You can't be all three. You got to be one or the other, but you can't be all three. Nothing can be and not be at the same time.
That's right. So expressing things right is the key. Even if you do register, you do have the power to appoint fiduciaries. If you know Quasimodo on TikTok, Amber, he put up some videos showing, I'll have to go find a video and send it to you. He put up 3 videos showing the title of his documents. He did a grant deed over the birth certificate, and the county assessor's office actually stamped it, and he paid the transfer tax, I think. Don't quote me on that, but it was a transfer tax involved. And he did a grant deed on it, and he did an acceptance of the deed, and a bunch of other documents. Me and him had a conversation about it, and he gave me an outline of what he did. So go back to the Bible. It says man was created from what? The dust of the earth, or the clay, or the land of the earth, right? So that means what? When the Bible says you're to go have dominion over all the earth or clay, wouldn't that be where we get self-governance? The only land God gave you was your body, because under the principles in the Bible, God owns everything else.
Yes.
So this is one of the reasons, and me and Popeye's known each other for a long time. And this is why I'm not a fan of all these processes, and some of them I've done. Because the processes are not teaching you the principles and how to operate.
Exactly. In fact, I'm one that have done a lot of the things, and for whatever reason, I came up short on an awful lot of them, such as the UCC1 filing and all that good shit. And ultimately, I do very little via paperwork, verbally, with whoever. Because simply put, I found that that's where my best success has been, because I just started asking them the right question. They being GovCo agents or whoever, never can answer any of the questions I ever have. They never can come up with an answer as to who the real party of interest is, the other real party of interest aside from me. They can't come up with anybody that has firsthand knowledge. They cannot come up with the one that's actually putting up surety for the claims being made. They can never do this. And ultimately, they realize, hey, we're not getting anywhere with this guy. We might as well just leave it alone, because we're not going to get anywhere.
Now, the 3.5-hour video I told you about, that discussion with Popeye, in that video, he goes over a conversation where he was on probation. They let him go, risking going back to jail. And they went over the whole thing of being able to pay, what is money. You know, every time they would throw a term out, he would ask them to define it. And eventually it got into ownership. And when they asked him about, well, who owns the clothes on your back? Well, he said, I'm led to believe that's God's. And now, and then after that, he would talk to them, and they wouldn't even touch the word pay. They wouldn't discuss money. They wouldn't discuss ownership, because why? He had them backed into a corner. And then they sent him a letter that the debt was discharged.
And they did use that exact wording, discharged. So, yeah, good stuff. If you know who you are as a player in the game, and you know how to ask the right questions, I'm led to believe that they eventually just leave you alone. But then again, this is part of why I talk about it all being a test. Everything is a test. And it's not going to be easy tests either. It wouldn't be a test if it was easy. There's no reason to have anything as a test and make it simple to get through. No, it's got to be hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to put you through the damn ringer. Straight up. If you don't feel like you're about ready to pull your hair out by the roots, they're not testing you hard enough. It's that simple. It's just that simple. Because they are testing to see if you know who you are as a player in the game. And if you can prove such, then they're going to let you go. If you can't, they're not going to let you go. They're going to sit there and dink with you all damn day. They're going to drive you up the damn wall. And it's their job to do so. Judges, I believe, it is their duty to test the people that are in front of them.
Yeah, because they need to make sure you're competent to handle your own affairs. If you're, right now, the majority of the people are acting in infancy. And under infancy, the infant can act as an agent. Well, that's where you started out at the age of 18. You started out as an agent for the trust, but you presumed that name was yours. You presumed it said first, middle, last. You made all these presumptions, even though they told you on the back it's their property. Okay? Nobody ever asked the question, well, if it's not mine, what are the rules? How should I be using it?
And one of the things, this is just a little side note for that. A while back, I had this brother on the phone attempting to help him as much as I could. He was wanting to understand some things. But yet, this brother could not get his mind unwrapped around the idea that why would his mom lie to him when it came to the name? And I said, but brother, it's not a matter of whether or not your mom would lie to you. If your mom said that she calls you Mikey, she's calling you Mikey. That's not a matter of whether or not she's lying to you. The point is that information on the so-called birth certificate, that is still hearsay, regardless of all other factors. That's always going to come down to the birth certificate, and what is on the actual birth certificate is what is used in terms of so-called identification purposes. Of course, they say that you're not supposed to use that as identification purposes, but yet the reality is, if a judge will accept hearsay, which is one of those things depending on what direction you're wanting that pendulum to swing, go ahead and let him. But yet then, if it's not something that's conducive to you, you better call that hearsay out. And I'll give you a prime example of where I actually had the hearsay play in my favor. After the so-called legal issues that I had been dealing with several years back were done, there was allegedly still a hitch in the record. There was allegedly still a so-called restraining order against the name, and so the name could not pass a so-called background check. Well, during the Rona year, 2020, I had to essentially have a telephone hearing with the judge because they wouldn't allow anybody into the so-called courthouse. So we get everybody on the phone, court clerk's on the phone, judge is on the phone. Judge asked me, and this is a judge that I had stood before and got this judge to refer to me as peaceful inhabitant. So this guy and I had already had a little history. So he starts off and he asks if I was such and such legal name. And I said, oh, that is the name that I am known to use. He didn't even blink. He just kept on moving. He asked if this is such and such date was the so-called birth date. And I said, allegedly. And he said, what do you mean by allegedly? And I said, well, I was awfully young that day. I don't quite remember it too well, but would it help if I told you that is the numbers on the so-called birth certificate? And he said, yes. He accepted hearsay right then. Hearsay is evidence. Of course, that's, like I said, there was a situation where I wanted him to accept the hearsay because I needed to get that so-called restraining order lifted off the name so the name could actually pass a so-called background check.
Yeah. See, the thing is when you if you go to court or they send you a letter or hand you a ticket, well, let's go back to if they mail you a letter or hand you a ticket, what is that called? That's called service of process. The agent is only there for service of process, okay? And if the agent is there to handle service of process, what is the duty of the agent? From that point on, the agent is supposed to notify the principal, which are the trustees, that your person has a matter that needs to be settled. What are we not doing? We're going in there claiming it's us and accepting all the liability. I had a ticket last year, and I've talked about this numerous times, but when it got to the point is this name on the ticket you? I said, ma'am, and I talked to the court clerk, and I sent him the recording, so he knows this is fact. I said, ma'am, that name is owned by the United States. They're the secured party in this matter, and I'm just the agent for that estate, and I must notify the principal of anything that affects its interest. And she puts me on, she says, can you hold a minute? Yep. She come back about 3 minutes later and says, that matter's been sealed and dismissed.
And 5 minutes earlier, it was an open matter in front of the court.
I never called it a ticket. I called it a debt instrument or an instrument of value. None of that stuff, because that's what it is. It's a debt instrument. And under Title 18 U.S.C. 8, it's an obligation of the United States.
What's going to be interesting here in about a week or so, I'm going to be heading back into the so-called court because I'm going to be seeking a so-called declaratory judgment against a so-called mortgage company has failed. They have failed different times over 110 days worth of attempt to speak to the real party in interest, and they haven't done so. So by them doing so, they dishonored request for adequate assurance of due performance. And by doing that, they've agreed that there is no real party of interest, and thus there is no debt to be so-called paid.
Now, I know, Amber, you were talking about the mortgage and you said it was fraud. It's not fraud. Fraud has certain legal requirements. One is the intent to commit fraud. That's one thing you cannot prove. That's why fraud is so hard to prove, because you cannot prove what is in the mind of the other parties. Was there an intent? Now, on the other hand, can you prove constructive fraud? Yes. Constructive fraud does not require intent.
And the reality is, too, any of the so-called agents that are sitting in front of you, helping you with whatever so-called mortgage or loans, credit cards, what have you, most of those agents, because of the fact that the information that we discuss here in these rooms, and that end of things, at the bank end, this stuff is compartmentalized, very much so. And that the agents, the little guys down at the bottom, they haven't a clue as to what's going on. And very few of the people near the top, except for the very top, i.e. so-called CEOs, presidents, whatever, they don't even have a clue. They have no idea what's actually going on. So in their minds, they're completely clean. And this is one of the ways that these companies can get away with this, because those people have complete plausible deniability, because they never knew any of the behind the curtains workings that the people at the very top are doing to do all of this. Because ultimately, there is still disclosure in everything that they're doing. That's how they're staying in honor. It's just a matter of, did we actually have the eyes to see it, to hear it? Because as soon as we consent negates all fraud. Consent negates all fraud. And since they're disclosing and you consent, it's all negated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just not sure
Since you
how to
bring
go
up
from there.
Since you bring up the mortgages and fraud and all that, now, but is there a way that you could pay off your mortgage and your debt through your own trust?
Well, first and foremost, there is no pay. So get rid of that word out of the brain. There is no pay. Yeah. You can only set off discharge, regardless of all other factors.
Can you discharge a debt, like say a mortgage or a credit card, and it's not, I heard it's not difficult, but that's a good thing for the government.
Well, here's the thing. It's already paid for, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they're tripling money income. They're asking from you. They already got it from your trust. I heard that. Yeah.
But here's what you're missing, okay?
No, it's all right.
When you went and filled out the application, you as the agent for the trust, you put everything in the name of the trust. You put the all caps name, you put the social. The social is nothing more than an EIN.
Right, that's how they got the money.
Okay, now, so under 12 U.S.C. 412, you issued a collateral security for the on behalf of the trust.
Correct. Yes.
The trustees of that trust are listed on the Social Security website. They are the principal party. The agent, you appointed the mortgage company as a sub-agent and a special agent. That's the reason why they're allowed to go create escrows in that name. Okay? Your duty was to report to the principal so the principal could balance the books.
How do I do that? What does that mean?
Writing a cover letter with the proper, just basically a short 1 to 2 page cover letter expressing your authority. And say, hey, As the agent, it's your responsibility, because if you go back to the congressional record, March 9th, 1933, they told us they mortgaged all the homes and all the property of the people of the nation. What is property? Property is rights and interests. Okay? Well, if property is rights and interests...
All right, sorry, I had the call and I got back on.
Oh, that's fine. If property is nothing more than rights and interest, and the homes are all mortgaged, then guess what? They are the responsible party. They told us this in the congressional record. They set up the laws according to this. Go back to Proclamation 2039. Proclamation 2039, Roosevelt said what? He ordered Congress to amend the Trading with the Enemy Act and to create special trust accounts for all new deposits, withdrawals on demand, cash on hand, or used in investing in United States obligations. So Amber, let me give you an example. Let's say I am the grantor. I create a trust and I name it Amber. And I appoint trustees, I appoint beneficiaries, and I give you this card. Does any of that make you a party to the trust?
I don't know.
No, it doesn't. Unless you specifically have something that says you're the beneficiary, you're not a beneficiary. And if you are not appointed trustees, you're not the trustees.
Responsible. You're
not responsible.
We're not responsible for nothing. You're right. That's it right there. That is it. We're not responsible because we got no legal paper saying that. So how do we get that discharged?
It's already paid for. You just get rid of the mortgage contract.
You just write the freaking principles and say, hey, under this statute at the state level, whatever state you're in, because where is Michigan. The trust doing business? The trust is doing business in one of the 50 states. So under the state code, it says here that the directors, officers, and agents of the corporation is not liable for the corporation. And under this code, the agent says what? My duty is for service of process. And under this code, it says that my duty is to notify the principal of any service of process. And since I'm doing this in good faith according to the laws, because your card says it's your property.
Now, is a mortgage different since you signed the mortgage?
No, nope. It's still their property. Tell me this, if Microsoft Incorporated goes and buys property, what information do they put down? They put the name of the company and the EIN.
Yeah.
Is Incorporated Microsoft's last name?
No.
No. Then why do you presume that John Henry Doe on the social is a first, middle, and last? It's not.
That's how
it's
we've been programmed.
Yeah, it's not. It's just the name of the trust is John Henry Doe.
Yeah.
They tell you. How many times has these politicians been on TV and said the term Social Security Trust?
All the time, actually, seems to me.
They tell you who the trustees are on the Social Security website.
Now, the one thing I will say is this, and this is something that I've been doing for several years now, and that is any of the so-called benefits that would come through the use of that so-called name, such as, any so-called government loans, anything, Social Security, whatever. I don't really care what it is. Food stamps. I don't give a shit. if you need to use that stuff, acquire it. Use that so-called name and acquire that stuff for your use. I have no problem with that. People say, oh, but then that creates a contract and now you're obligated. Bullshit. Where's the contract and who's claiming that I'm obligated to do anything? Who in the world is claiming that I've got an obligation?
Look at the screen.
Take that claim. Are you putting up surety for that claim? Because if you're not, I don't even want to talk to you, because I do believe that sacrifice is the true measure of credibility. You only want to talk to the people that are willing to put up the surety, because outside of that, you're only talking to meddling interlopers.
Look at the screen right here. That's on the Social Security website. It says the Board of Trustees consists of 6 members, 4 of whom automatically serve by virtue of their positions in the federal government. And these 4 are what? Secretary of the Treasury, the managing trustee. Some of y'all have heard the term first trustee or managing trustee. That's that. That's Janet Yellen. Secretary of Labor. Why is the Secretary of Labor the second trustee? Well, when you went and got a job and you filled out a W-4 and you put the name, the social, and address, you checked the box U.S. citizen, who's the employee? Is it you or is it the trust? It's the trust, because under the 14th Amendment, all corporations, all businesses, and all trusts are what? Legal persons.
Yes.
Under the, and that means what? The Secretary of Labor has to keep up with what the trust is doing. The address you put down is the Office of the Registered Agent for Service of Process. The third trustee, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Why are they the third trustee? How many times have you heard of Title II or Title IV funding? And who gets that? The state. The state's the beneficiary of the trust. They're the ones receiving the distributions under Title II and Title IV, and probably some other sections under Social Security. You're not the grantor, because you don't have no memory of when this thing's been created. For the most people, you have no firsthand knowledge that you're the grantor. You don't even have firsthand knowledge that you're the trustees, and you don't have any evidence that you're the beneficiary. And my buddy Tim, who's in this group, he shared a phone recording a while back. He had a conversation with Social Security and asked them, am I the beneficiary? The first phone call, they said, oh, yes, you are. Can you send me that in writing? Oh, no, we can't. Why not? Oh, we just can't. You have to go to your local office. He goes to the local office. Same thing. Am I the beneficiary of this account? Oh, yes, you are. Can you give me that in writing? No, we can't. Why do you need it? Oh, I just need it for my records. So 2 weeks later, he has another phone call. This time he talks to somebody higher up, and they point blank tell him, they said, no, you're not the beneficiary yet. I said, Tim, I told you, if you're not the beneficiary yet, somebody else is.
Because if he was a beneficiary, he'd get all the money.
If he was the beneficiary, it changes the nature of the game, because the beneficiary's never liable for the trust unless the trustees don't do their job. And now the beneficiary can sue them for not doing their job. Now, on the other hand, under the laws of agency, the liability is different. The agent is never liable for the principal if the agent does their job. The only time the agent becomes liable is when the agent doesn't do their job.
And let's get one thing straight. There is no set thing as money. Just because people think that there is such a thing doesn't mean that there is in reality. The Federal Reserve note is not money specifically. It is a debt. And I know it, well, hold on. I know it is used as money, and many people do consider it. And it can be, because even as a debt instrument, it does have some so-called value. But money specifically is only what two or more people agree upon at the time of contracting. That. So unless you've actually had a meeting of the minds with somebody over specifically what money is, money has not yet been defined by anybody specifically, because they can't until there is an opportunity to have a meeting of the minds. Money comes under what is known as quid pro quo, or the this for that, aka sufficient consideration.
Yeah,
so keep that in mind.
Now, I look at money slightly different, and here's why. I don't necessarily say there is no money. I say there is all kinds of money. Back in the day, what did we use? We used seashells at one time, right? Did those seashells have any value in and of themselves? No. The people believed they did, right? My buddy Mark up Minnesota settled a traffic ticket with grains of rice.
Well, this is why I say that there is no specific thing as money. I didn't say that there was no money. That's why I said there is no specific thing that is just automatically set as this one thing for all eternity and for all dealings is money. No, damn near everything, anything can be money. And that's why I use the peppercorn.
You can piss in a cup, and if you can piss in a cup and say, hey, do you accept this as money? And if they take it, then they accepted it.
Yep.
Think of a drug test. That you giving them something of value. How do they make their money? By testing that urine to see what's there and reporting it, and they get paid to do it. You gave them something of value called piss. Did they ever compensate you? No. You just volunteered to accept the liability of whatever the test come, and they got paid.
It's actually pretty simple stuff. It really is. It's just a matter of we as a society have been so conditioned to believe the opposite of what really is. And this is part of why I do believe that contracts especially ought to be taught to children as early as 5th, maybe 6th grade at the outside. But of course, that does not behoove or benefit GovCo and or GovCo agents any at all, because of people starting at 5th or 6th grade started understanding contracts. They would, by the time they became so-called age of majority, they wouldn't be contracting with GovCo anymore.
My buddy Mark up in Minnesota got a letter from the IRS stating you owe blah, blah amount of money. He sent him a letter back that said, I will be more than happy, because why? You got to remain in honor. He said, I will be more than happy to settle this matter, and I don't got it word for word, if you can direct me in what, I said, if you can direct me according to the supreme law of land, in what species you want me to make a tender. That's pretty close to what he said, but not exactly. He used the verbiage right out of the Constitution without claiming Article 1, Section whatever, Clause whatever. He didn't say that. He just used the verbiage. That was last June. He sent it to the agent, to the head legal counsel of the IRS, to the IRS commissioner, and to the Attorney General's office. Guess what? They haven't never responded. See, by law, 31 USC 5118, they cannot demand payment in any certain species.
Because our debt is been cleaned out.
It's already everything's already been paid.
Already paid.
That's why everything's already been paid. That's why
I got what you're saying.
Yeah, that's part of why Title 31 was written the way it is, because it's 192 codified. And HCR 192 says that nobody can demand a specific form of payment either.
Well, they did repeal HCR 192, so you shouldn't use it. You should use, I think it's 48 Stat 112, and it's Public Law 73-10.
Yeah, just go with Title 31, Section 5118. It's codified, and it's right there in everybody's face. Just go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this stuff is very simple. You do not have to do any of these magical processes if you don't want to. You don't have to create a trust. You just got to learn how to express the trust that's already there. Now, if you want to run a business and you want to have employees and you want to protect assets, yeah, then you might want to do a trust. You might want to do different things because that's what the elite do. But if you want to live a simple, quiet life, you need to learn law of agency and you need to learn law of contracts and learn how to handle your business.
In other words, you need to learn exactly who you are as a player in the game. And if not, well, suffer as you are. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
You got one of two choices. Figure out who you are or just keep being touted around. Because if you don't know who you are, then you're going to get what ultimately you're asking for everything that they give you. Because you don't know. And again, like we were talking about earlier, it's all a test, and everything that they're doing to you is not to bring you down, it's to test you. And if you don't pass the test, they're going to keep throwing more and more and more at you until you do.
Yeah, all they're doing is when you go in there and get tested and you throw these things out that you've been learning, if you don't do it right, they just throw you to the back of the line and you're going to tell you to start over, and you're going to come back later and go through another test until you get better and better and better. And maybe one day learn how the system works. And they publish all the rules, but everybody has this mental block that, oh, we should not read their statutes, not read the law. Well, guess what? In Joshua 1:8, I want to show y'all this.
That's where almost all the disclosures at is in the code, statutes, and regulations. The disclosure is there. Well, a lot of it's in symbolism too, but most of the disclosure is right there in those writings.
I want you to think about it. You know, everything's based on biblical principles. I want you to think about this. Look at what Joshua 1:8 says. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Now think about it logically. When this was written, what was the law? The first 5 books of the Bible. That was their version of statutes and codes. When it said this book of the law, it's talking about their version that you could say statutes and codes. They said, meditate on this so you know what to do in life, you know how to do things, and you'll have success. And if God instituted government to punish the wicked, the problem is we're rebelling against the system being the wicked, and we get mad when the government does what it does. Instead of saying, wait a minute, what are the rules and how should we be operating?
Well, this is ultimately where it comes down to something that I talk about too, and that we're all the problem. We're the problem. It's not GovCo. We are. We're the dumb ones that aren't figuring shit out, and then we're pointing fingers at the people that are just simply doing their job. It's business as usual for them.
Yep.
That's all it is. Yeah. It's business as usual. They're just doing what they're set out to do. And again, because they're there to test you, it's not something that they're doing against you specifically. So, you know, so many people think, oh, they're singling me out. They're doing this, they're doing that. Yeah, well, maybe to a certain point, they might be singling you out because maybe they see you as one that needs to be tested a little harder.
Maybe you need to learn a few things.
Maybe you need to learn a lot of things, you know?
Yeah. You learn
your problem.
Yeah. You learn your best lessons when you're being tested.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely, because you don't find out anything about yourself when you're at the pinnacle. It's only when you're down in the deepest of valleys, when you're getting shit thrown at you from all sides, that you truly find out who you are. You find your fortitude, and that's what they're testing. They're testing you on your mental and intestinal, and sometimes even your so-called financial fortitude. And they don't give a shit. They don't care what part they have to test. They're going to test it regardless, because they don't have any emotional tie to you. They don't give a shit if you pass or not. They're just going to keep throwing it at you until you pass.
So now, Amber, is this making sense, or do you have questions?
Oh, I've got a lot of questions.
Well, that's good. Even if it's making sense, dear, even if it's making sense, if you don't have a lot of questions, there's a problem. I'm just saying.
Now,
in fact, hold on just a second, preacher, because I want to touch on one thing. This is something that we're all programmed out of. We've been programmed out of asking questions at a very young age. I know, because it was done to me. I did it to the daughters. I'm sure that the great-grandparent or the grandparents did it to the parents. Great-grandparents did it to the grandparents. Fortunately, I've now taught the daughters, and they will not be doing it to any of their offspring. But ultimately, there was a point in time where all of us were asking questions, and the parents started telling us, stop asking so many questions. And the reason being is because the parents didn't know the answers to these things either. But instead of giving us reasonable answers, they just, like they were done to them, they deprogrammed us from asking questions. Asking questions is the most important thing that we could possibly do.
Now, Amber, you're new to the group. If you go into tap on the name at the top, and Tony, I think you're new too. If you tap on the name, it'll bring up a menu. Okay, and you'll see media, files, stuff like that. Scroll to the bottom of the files. Just scroll and scroll. You got to cache the files to your phone. I mean, and here's the deal. I do teach classes. I am doing a workshop on law of agency right now that is detailed. I don't mandate everybody to take my class. I've got the books in there. I told you, like in my link tree, the Gilbert's Law Summary on Law of Agencies, they're free for people to learn. You just got to understand that's going to be a basic test book, because it's written for law students to get you your basic information to pass a test at law school. Okay? That Law of Agency is there for people to download freely. You've got
highly recommended.
Yes, you got 15 different Gilbert's Law Summaries in the files section. Nobody has to pay for anything. If you want to actually have detailed time and ask questions like a class, oh yeah, then we'll do a class. But other than that, I tell people exactly what's going on. I can't do it in detail doing a live driving down the road.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? But all this information is out there if you just know what to look for. It's just like there's a book called Commercial Paper and Payment Law that's free. That'll teach you the basics of banking. Okay? Learning how to do things. And shoot, by the way, the next class that we're doing on agency is going to get into the duties of the agent in depth and negotiable instruments.
Now, this also goes right back to...
Now, that class, is that going to be like mortgages and stuff?
Oh, everything's negotiable instruments. It don't matter if it's a car note, a credit card, a mortgage. It's all negotiable instruments.
Well, that's the class. When is that class going on?
Every workshop is the first and third Saturday of the month.
Oh, it's okay. So you always have the same class every first and third?
No, it's not going to be this same identical class.
Oh, but this is the one I want.
Yeah, the first two classes was the first and third of last month. and we're going through the law of agency in depth through corpus juris secundum, going over all the principles. And then once
so next one,
agency's
the
done,
negotiable contract,
negotiable instruments and the duties of the agent. It'll be 2 classes. My plan is to get through section 107 and sections 20 all the way down to section 208 next month between the 2 classes.
When is the negotiable contracts class?
I would have to go look at the table of contents.
Okay. I would like to get into that class.
If you join as a member of the website, the Century member, you get both classes every month. Plus, you get into the workshop group where every Saturday we're not doing class. We do the same time every month. We do a live where you bring your questions, you bring your documents, where you learn how to write. We go over everything to teach you how to write things short and concise, help find the codes when you can't find them. Because part of doing this is learning how to find things, learning how to search for things, getting your search terms right, because that way you learn how to do things short and concise to where they kind of see that you know what you're doing. Because here's the problem. You have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself. And people say, well, what you say they will use against you in a court of law. Anything you say will be used, right? People think that's based on what you speak. It's not just what you speak, it's also what you write. So learning how to write in a short, concise manner isn't always easy. When I first started doing this, I was writing a book. We want to explain every detail, and that will bite you in the butt. You will give them a way out when you do that. Because you're going to slip and you're going to say the wrong thing using the wrong words, and they're going to say, woohoo, we got this one.
Which is part of the reason why I'm so tight on people in these calls for just using certain words. Preachers too. You got to keep. I was just going to say, you just got to stay totally on point when we're in the general sense of a conversation, a quiet, private conversation with, say, your spouse at home. Do you need to be that tight? No, but you probably should be, just to keep the brain going in the right direction, get that muscle memory going to where you're not spitting words out like payment and other things, dollars and whatever. But in these conversations, because this is essentially your training for any other situation when you have a GovCo agent in front of you or a creditor or whatever. And this is where you need to then find and hone the language, the entire mindset. Because when you're in that situation, like preachers just say, if you slip up, they've got you. Got to be so on point, and they're going to do everything they can to get you off point. It is their job. That is how they're testing you. This is the test, is to get you off point, and if they get you off point, you just failed the test.
Look, people in my group that are familiar with me, they will slip up and they will say my name or my birth certificate, and I immediately stop them. Why? If you don't get used to saying it in here right, when you're under pressure in front of them, you're going to slip.
Well, like one of the brothers is fond of saying, if you can't do it drunk, what makes you think you can do it in front of a judge? Think about that. Think about that. If you can't do it drunk, what makes you think you can do it in front of a judge? Well, most people aren't even drunk in these calls. Everybody's stone cold sober. But if you can't get it done here, what makes you think you're going to get it done in front of a judge when you're under all kinds of stress and pressure?
That judge will make you drunk, man.
Oh, fuck yeah.
No kidding, King. No kidding, King. No,
and
look.
I'll tell you right now, I've actually been trashed on so-called psychedelics a couple of hits of acid and a stack of mushrooms and been able to just roast people. In a night of role playing, I annihilated everyone because I kept it in mind. If you can't do it drunk, what makes you think you could do it in front of a judge? Well, I'll have that at the next level. If you can't do it tripping, what makes you think you could do it in front of a judge? Well, I was tripping balls, and I annihilated. You have to be on point.
You know, the Bible talks about you're to go to your adversary quickly before they drag you into court, right? Well,
we talk matters about outside and independent of the court. Do not create controversy to where the court has jurisdiction.
We talk about public and private, but we never want to go to our adversary quickly, privately. We wait till the last minute when we have a court hearing, and then we want help. And then you're too late. You gotta handle things totally differently when you go to court.
Absolutely, which is part of the reason why doing an administrative process is an exceptionally important deal to do, because even recorded phone calls aren't nearly as good as having in writing and having a third-party witness to all responses to and from the other said entity.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm about to go to fruition on just that exact deal on a so-called mortgage and the other entities, and there's two of which now are involved because the original mortgager hot potatoed the damn thing over to a third-party debt collector as soon as they received the first notice for adequate assurance. But ultimately, they completely have failed, and they have made the agreement. And everything being in writing and having gone through a notary, I now have witness statements from a notary saying that there has been 0 responses from this other entity.
Yeah, now
basically makes a done deal.
You do want to make friends with a notary and get you a notary in your back pocket.
Absolutely.
Because why? The stuff I'm telling you is the stuff I used to do. If you're going to do an administrative process, you want to get a notary. And most people think, and I used to be one of those, I'm preaching to the choir, okay? I've been at this 11 years. And you got to look at things from an evidentiary process. People think, well, I sent the letter certified and I got a green card back. Okay, if you had to prove that in court what you sent them, could you? No. All you can prove to the court is you sent them an envelope. That does not prove what's in it.
Their record can be adjusted by them, especially with those who they feel are,
Yes. So you get a notary. What does a notary do? A notary attaches an affidavit of mailing. What was in the envelope, because the notary seals it and mails it.
Yep. When you have the notary notarized because you've signed the so-called document right there, then that notary takes those documents, stuffs the envelope, and actually addresses the envelope for you. It now completely takes all of that out of your hand. Doesn't mean that the notary knows specifics in the document. They do know what the document basically is, and they do look it over. But that doesn't mean that they have read it and or will verify or validate anything that is in that document. They're just simply notarizing or verifying the fact that you brought them a document that you allegedly signed or autographed. But yet that is sufficient, though, especially if you can provide copies of those documents that was stuffed into the envelope, which is essentially you just have the notary make a copy of everything that they just notarized. Just make a copy of it all and hand it back to you.
So, Amber, you got questions. Let's hear some of them.
Yes. So you were talking about how we're supposed to write the principles. And you talked about how the agent's job is to notify the principal. Is the principal different depending on each different negotiable instrument or negotiable contract or whatever it is? Or is it always those? those trustees that you were mentioning on the Social Security, the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Labor, things like that?
It depends on what it is. Now, the blanket statement is this: if it is tied to the social, those are the ones you're doing business with. That's it. Bottom line. So if you went and got your driver's,
social?
Yes, the trustees on the Social Security website. Okay. Now, and I can send you that link. That's not a problem. I've posted it numerous times in here. And I tell people this: write the name Janet Yellen, all capital letters, comma, trustee. You want to express the office. And send it to the Treasury. Send it to her.
Trustee doesn't have to be all caps, though, right?
Now, the trustee doesn't. I mean, you can if you want, if you just think it looks better. You're just expressing the office. The office, you know, USFL put out a video a few weeks back dealing with the all caps name. And he said, go look at a lot of these senators. The reason why they are not, you can't hold them liable. Go look at how they dress themselves. When they're on TV and they introduce the name on the bottom of the screen, what is it? It's all capital letters. You're expressing the office. The office is never liable. That's their official capacity operating under agency.
Okay. So you're wanting to notify them of everything. So, for example, you're talking about the mortgage. You would send them the mortgage contract and notify them of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
And then do you have to tell them what you want them to do, or do they just know what they're supposed to do?
Oh, they know what they're supposed to. You don't have to tell them their job. There's a lady in my group here. She goes by Wolverine. She wrote a letter one time to the Secretary of State about her passport, and she read it to us. And I said, Dawn, you got a problem. She said, what? I said, why are you ordering them to do their job? Don't you think they know it? Yeah, I think they would. I said, now look at your letter in a different light. You are ordering them how to do their job. She says, oh, I can see what you're saying. I said, you might want to consider writing a prayer of equity and ask their forgiveness. Well, she did. Perfectly written. No, you don't have to worry necessarily always about perfection. Wrote her letter, an equitable letter, and she put the principle that's laid out in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us, our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us, right? So she put that in the letter, and she apologized to them and said, would you please forgive me? She mailed it off with tracking. They got it 2 days later. She goes and watches her login on the passport, and then 2 days after they got the letter, they approved her passport. They didn't give her no notice, no nothing. See, to get equity, you have to give equity. And if you want a template for equity, go look at the Lord's Prayer.
Well, here's another thing. Well, real quick, just hold your thought, brother. Here's another thing on people are ordering people to do things. That is exactly akin. It's synonymous with making claims. Well, if you can't
or slavery,
if you cannot prove whatever it is that you're claiming, if you cannot prove that whatever you're ordering somebody to do is actually their job, what the hell are you thinking? Seriously, you have to have actual tangible evidence. When it starts getting into this stuff, one of the biggest things, and the reason why I harp so much on hearsay versus firsthand testimony and or actual tangible evidence, is that right there. Because technically speaking, all these courts, because ultimately everything might end up in court. And if it does, those courts are not supposed to be operating on hearsay. And if they do, like I was saying earlier, you need to call them on it. There's only a few rare situations where you might want them to let some hearsay slide by because it benefits you. But outside of that, you don't want them doing any hearsay evidence and accepting that, because everybody on the other side is only going to be able to present hearsay. All they've got is hearsay. And if you can make that court based on your knowledge stay away from hearsay and only accept firsthand testimony, now they have lost completely because they don't have any of it.
You don't want them to continue treating you as an incumbent, as that's.
Yep. I told y'all earlier about Tim. Well, Tim has graced us with his presence on the phone call with the social. Hi, Tim.
Hi, sir.
I can tell you that they told him, no, you're not the beneficiary yet. And if you do reach the age to where you get benefits, guess what? You're still only a limited beneficiary, only to those specific benefits. You're not the full beneficiary.
It's standing your ground and knowing how to stand behind your ground, as they treat the majority of the population as dummies or incumbents, idiots, those types of words if you look them up in the Black Law Dictionary. So, and Pastor is very, very, very intelligent when it comes down to stuff. He has vast knowledge.
Most people one of the things success is these.
Go ahead.
These people know that there are groups like this out there that are teaching people templates. Come pay me $500 for my template, and I'll help you do your paperwork. They know that the average person never has an intent to ever take to court. You give them a negotiable instrument without the intent of fighting them for that right, you just gave them money, and they can do with it what they will.
You had talked about earlier asking, what are the rules? Like on the Social Security card, it says you're only allowed to use this for certain purposes, but they don't tell you what it is. Who do you ask? Because I went to Social Security office to ask, and they have no idea, or they wouldn't let me know anything. I'm like, I need to know what the rules are, and I don't know where to find them. They won't tell me anything.
Well, there is not necessarily, there is a certain set of rules per se, yes. That's called the Social Security Act. Okay? And they publish that act on their website. All the historical acts and everything, right? But all those rules, really, that's just their job. I look at it, the way I look at it is this: what is my relationship to it? Those are the rules I need to worry about. If I am just an agent, what is the agent's duty? I know, Amber, I know you've seen it. Notice the agent is notice the principal. Why is that? Because if you're the agent is supposed to do what? Notify the principal. That's why it is deemed notice to agent is notice to principal, and vice versa.
I-84, where are you at?
Well, here's something to consider too, and that is, he was mentioning to basically stay on point. Yes, you need to stay on point. In fact, this all gets back to, and of course, of the so-called rules, and when you ask somebody what something means and they can't answer you or they won't, part of that is because, well, two things. One, it's all ambiguous. the author of all these so-called code statutes and or whatever, you're never going to actually talk to that person, such as even a so-called mortgage agreement, loan agreement. The guy that wrote that agreement was some guy in a legal department, and he's not even around. He was probably, might have even been an outside, not actually in-house of whatever nature. Mm-hmm. So you're never going to actually have the ability to ask the guy that wrote those words, what do you mean by them words? What do you mean by this word? What do you mean by that word? And nobody that's sitting in front of you has any clue as to what the intent was by the author.
Hello, Elena. Nice of you to join us finally. I know you said you were going to be with family.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see the link until, I was looking around noon, and then I didn't see it, and then I got caught on the phone with actually M&T dealing with some stuff. And
I was confused. I thought I was actually talking to you when I was talking to Amber. I was confused. So I'm on backtrack to your UCC statement that we were discussing.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the problem. The name isn't yours. Do you have children, Elena?
I do not.
Okay. You're going to want to know this stuff for the day it comes when you do. Okay. There's a CDC document that I have would list all 50 states on the 3 products of conception. Okay. You have the umbilical cord, you have the placenta, and you have the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Amber did say yes, she's got footprint documents for her children. So I've got them for my daughter, my youngest. I've got them for me. On my daughter's, she was born in a totally different state than I was. But the paragraph on the bottom of the footprint document is the same. The mother verified the information and received her baby. Okay.
Right.
Now, here's the kicker. All 3 products are considered born alive. All 3 products have to be registered. Guess who never got registered, though? If the mother received the baby never got registered. The only thing that got registered was the other 2 products because that's the only thing the hospital had in its possession.
Yeah, I was actually watching your video that you did with Felicia back in August. And you covered that much. Actually, I actually had like a little aha moment like halfway through your video. I didn't watch the whole thing, but yeah.
So,
a lot.
And one of the things I tell people is using, Elena Deakins. Let's say I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Yeah, Elena Deakins. Yeah.
Yeah. If I create a trust, which makes me the grantor, and I appoint trustees and I appoint beneficiaries, and then I give you some identification card, is that trust you? No, it's a trust. It's a piece of paper.
Right.
Now, the trustees are the legal owner of that trust. When you are doing a UCC1 filing, my first question is, how did you perfect your security interest in that trust? You didn't. If that name is their property and the trustees are the ones that have the decision-making power, did you ever do an administrative process and prove they owe you a debt?
No.
No. Then you don't have the authority to do a UCC1 against the trust. It's not your name, it's not your property, and they tell you this. Read the back of the card.
Okay, so UCC1 is not, I don't know. I was just looking up, I was reading the Redemption Manual 4.5. And it was, I think it's section 5 or 6 when I was talking about SPC, the steps to do that. And that's where I saw the UCC1, and then it went into depth about the UCC1, about you need the security agreement and all those. I can't think of them off the top of my head, like a POA, stuff like that. And the POA makes sense, but I just don't know at this point. I just feel get pulled into all these directions. And to be honest, the first time I've ever heard about any agent, anything was from your video that I watched, that 1 hour, the 78-minute one.
I've heard about it. I have heard about it from other sources. For example, if you Google on YouTube, if you go to YouTube and you type in Ken W. birth certificate and agency, he went to probate court and asked 3 questions. To the first question, the probate court in Kentucky told him, to the first question, we do not have jurisdiction over Ohio's property. Okay? So they did not answer that question because the birth certificate is property of the state. The birth record is their property. Okay? Now, to the other 2 questions, what is it and what is his relationship to it? They plainly tell him it is a state agency and you are the agent. Okay? Yeah. Ken W. resigned as registered agent. I personally don't recommend it. Brian Parker, a buddy of mine, resigned as registered agent. Again, I don't recommend it. Why? Do you have an interest in that name? Yes, you do. If you resign, you are giving up all your interest. But are you the only one that has a interest in it? No.
Well, I guess not if the state owns it.
That's right. See, you have a name. What did your mother call you? Your mother called you Elena. Your dad calls you Elena. They call you daughter. Your friends call you whatever. You have all of these different names. Look at the judge. Which name do you want? That all caps name isn't you.
Right.
It was given to us to do commerce, yes. But we're not doing it right. We're creating all this chattel property in the name of the trust, but we're not communicating to the trustees. And earlier I showed the trustees on the Social Security website. Well, if the trustees are the legal owner, that makes them the obligor. If you go back and read the congressional record, March 9th, 1933, they tell you this. They said they mortgaged all the homes and all the property of the people of the nation. Well, if they mortgaged it, they're the obligor. They're responsible. But this is where you get into voluntary consent. They let you presume whatever you want because you have a First Amendment right to your beliefs. If you believe you are a U.S. citizen, guess what? They won't tell you no different. But if they have to prove it, they can't.
Right. So, like, how do you go from, like, living life as a slave to, like, reversing everything that's voluntary?
Learning that you're, learning who you are in relation to that name, and learning that you're already free.
Okay, but, like, I'm talking about, like, when I say free, I'm talking about, like, the trustees paying for my life. You know, like, because I, like, in the video where I had the aha moment, I literally got to the part where you showed a little document that had, like, 1 sentence on it, and it was talking about, like, you talking about, like, send this to the Secretary of State saying that you're basically asking, like, hey, am I the beneficiary of this all caps name? And
yeah, like, what I've learned since then is they will not admit to that. And what I've learned, and if you go into the file section, they'll be in your new Elena, same thing applies to you. Tap on the name at the top. You'll get a drop-down menu, and you'll see files. Okay? Under the files section, you're going to have to scroll all the way to the bottom. Okay? And I'm going to show you. Let's see.
I found them.
Let's say. Now, the reason you got to scroll is because you've got to cache the documents. But an express agency, yes, in an express agency, you have to accept the office, right? An implied agency, you do not. Now look at this, American jurisprudence, second paragraph. An express agency is an actual agency created as a result of an oral or written agreement of the parties. Did they come and sit down with you and say, hey, sign here, sign here, and sign here, you're now the agent? No. An implied agency is also an actual agency, the existence of which as a fact is proved by deductions or inferences from other facts and circumstances of the particular case, including the words and conduct. Now, what is that deductions and inferences? Well, if the state owns the birth record, it's their property. On the back of the social, it says it's their property. On your personal checks, it says authorized representative. Well, authorized representative and agent is synonymous. Okay?
Okay.
You're not the grantor. It was created before you was even aware of it. You don't even really know if it was created. You just know you have this stuff, and they tell you it's their property. Well, you're not the trustees because you don't get to make decisions for the trust, and you don't have any evidence that you're a beneficiary. So the only thing you can be is a general agent. Now, that's American Jurisprudence Section 15 under agency. Now, here is Section 6. Classification. A general agent is authorized to do all acts connected with the business or employment in which he or she is engaged, while a special agent is authorized to do only one or more specific acts pursuant to particular instructions or with restrictions necessarily implied from the act to be done. Now, you were talking about your mortgage in one of your videos, how it's fraud. One, it's not fraud. Fraud has a specific legal requirement. You have to be able to prove intent. You can't. Now, constructive fraud, oh, that's a whole nother ballgame. Constructive fraud doesn't require intent. But even then, wasn't constructive fraud? No, because why? You put the name of the mortgage in the name of the trust. Okay? You put the name, you put the social, and under 12 U.S.C. 412, you issued collateral securities. Under 12 U.S.C. 411, the mortgage company takes it to the Treasury and receives book entry credits because you appointed them, unbeknownst to you, as a special agent. That's why they're restricted to be able to creating escrows on behalf of that name, that account. Now, the agent never reported to the principal that they did any of this.
Yeah, they didn't securitize it, right?
No, they securitize it because you gave them permission. But the agent being you, because the agent's duty is to only notify the principal. In other words, hey, principal, I issued this security on behalf of the trust. That way the principal can balance the freaking books.
So what gives us the right to do that, though? Like to
go back to the bankruptcy.
To do the contract.
That's how they operate the system. That's how they designed it to be such that the people would naturally utilize these things through what they've been taught.
Well, it's go back to the basics. For any contract to be enforceable, there has to be what? Lawful consideration. Go back to the congressional record. They said, hey, people, let us mortgage all your homes and all the property of the people of the nation so we can fund this country. Well, they left it open for you to be the liable party if you want to be, because Article 1, Section 10, they cannot interfere with the obligation of a contract, right? But they said, look, they created this new deal for what reason? In exchange for government obligations. So guess what? They said, look, let us secure your rights and interests, and we will be the obligor. But instead, people say, oh, no, that's my name. They said, that's my property. They said, okay, if that's what you believe, so be it. So they said, hey, let us use it so we can fund this system. And they had to give you equal consideration. The people don't understand that.
When you're born, you know, your mother signs off as a U.S. citizen. Alongside its consent. It's, you know,
does that
they
make her
naturally
a
make you
U.S.
consent.
citizen? No. I did a FOIA request and asked for records of U.S. citizenship. They come back and said there is none.
It's
so
the
back
U.S, which is D.C.
So back
Hold
on
on,
the agent.
let me check in. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I got to check in here. Right here, 801-02426. And today is what? The 28th. Take exit 179. Bustin' loose. 582 west. And your trailer number? 1403. And then your phone number. Yeah, got here to pick up my load to go to Pennsylvania. After Americold screwed everybody, because Americold got hacked. There, door 12. Okay. Americold got hacked again under ransomware. Been shut down for 2 days. Broker didn't tell me none of that. They didn't even know. Now back to your question on the agency.
So the agent initiates an event. I don't know if these are the right words, but like, for example, the mortgage. I don't know if you would call that a contract or an event. Do they have to go through like a TDA account and through their bank, and then the money's sent back to them to pay it, or do you just send it and that's your job is done?
No, you just fill out the freaking contracts. You're putting it in the name of the trust. So your duty, once that's done, you've got under my last 2 classes. The last class I did, we went over ratification. Ratification, you've got ratification before the event and ratification after the event. Ratification of the agent before the event is something along the lines. Now, Elena, I know you downloaded the agency book. It will give you a brief explanation of ratification.
Okay.
Ratification before the event is where you say, hey, trustees, this is what I'm planning on doing. So if they remain silent, then the event gets ratified and your office is protected, your office as agent. Okay? In other words, you tell them, say, look, this is my authority as the agent for the trust. I'm going to go issue a collateral security to this company for this purpose. And if they remain silent, it gets ratified. Okay? Ratification after the fact is when you say, hey, principal, I issued said securities, said whatever, and if they remain silent, it gets ratified and they balance the books.
So you're supposed to do it before and after, or one or the other?
One or the other.
Okay.
Yeah. You do it in good faith. You state your authority under the law, because why? Some of it's by operation of law. Some of it is by statute. The statutes will tell you that the officers directors and agents of the entity are not liable. Okay. Also, the agent's duty is for service of process.
Did we lose him?
Yeah, probably. Welcome to the Ponzi scheme, by the way, that you just figured out.
Okay, I can hear you. So,
where the hell did you go, man?
Oh, I had one of those robocall people call me.
Not just
trying to
down
drum
a
up
search
business
party for you.
I'm not hard to find. Just look for my truck.
Big red one.
Actually, no, but it's got my profile picture on the side of the truck. You see that? You see me.
The profile.
Now, yeah, my profile picture is my family crest.
Oh, gotcha. And did you say you're on 84 or something right now? Were you in Oregon?
No. Right now I'm in North Carolina, getting ready to pick up and going up to Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
Now back to Elena's question. See, now the secured party process, though, has its benefit. One of the things I learned, I studied it for almost 5 years. And I'm still studying trust law. And that, to me, is some of the best things, is trust law. And the secured party process, people are making the presumption. And if you make this presumption, everything from that point on is going to be flawed. And that presumption is, that's my name. Well, if you study trust law and there are trustees, the trustees are the legal owner of whatever the property is. So how can it be yours if you don't own it?
It's not.
So when you're doing certain processes, you have to come from the standpoint of, what authority do I have to do that? For example, you're talking about a POA. A POA requires an appointment. Did the trustees appoint you to that? No. You have to do an acceptance of the office also. Anything outside of agency requires an appointment by the trustees. And here's the other thing people are missing. The other thing is this: the probate court. When the placenta and umbilical cord was recorded, it was placed in probate because it was born alive, the born alive test. And since it did die, it died shortly after exiting the mother. It died intestate, was placed in probate. Nobody's going to the freaking probate court. Very few people ever go there to fix the foundation. They're doing all these processes instead of going to the foundation.
Would you go to probate like right after you leave the hospital? Or is there how do you know to go to probate? Is it like a court date that you get sent in the mail?
No.
Or you just show up and be like, hey, I'm here to...
No, that's why you need to learn the process. So when you file your papers, you're doing everything right to basically get the appointment you needed. Because what I'm right now presently doing is trying to get my paperwork perfected between me and my dad. To get the paperwork perfected to be appointed as conservator over the estate, because the conservator has the same investment powers as the trustee without the liability of the trustee. Now think about something. How many times have you heard you're the undisclosed third-party investor on a mortgage? Well, yes, that's true. The problem is you're not recognized because you've not had the office appointed, aka conservator, to where you are recognized as the investor.
That's crazy. I've only heard that word one other time. And I've never heard that in this space. I've only heard it when Britney Spears was trying to get her dad off her trust.
And a lot of these terms and documents we're talking about are in my file section.
This is chaotic. It's like, it's already hard, like having to relearn everything that, you went through just in life in general, and then having to relearn things that you've learned in this space, because not everything's just like cut and paste, like factual.
Yes, here's the problem. You've got too many gurus out there thinking they know what the hell they're doing, and they don't. A lot of them learn a process from somebody else. Then they claim it as their own and say, hey, come pay me a bunch of money and I will do this process for you. But they never teach people the principles.
Mm-hmm. You got to be the one picking up the telephone.
Yeah, I hate these freaking gurus out there. The state national people, the American national, whatever you want to call them, okay? I actually can't stand them. And I had, I don't know if you know Truth Hurts on TikTok. He just blocked me the other day.
I don't know if I know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is
I have these people block me because when I call them out on what they're doing wrong, they're too heavily invested to fix the problem. Go ahead, Popeye.
This is where one of our teachings in the Bible comes in handy. Psalms 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is the honor of kings to search a matter out. It's up to you to figure this shit out for yourself. Don't just take somebody's word. In fact, I tell people, don't take my word for shit. Mm-hmm. Start looking at this stuff yourself, because that's the only way that you're going to know it, so to speak. And that is a bit tongue-in-cheek because somebody just said the game telephone. Yeah, you got to learn it for yourself. Like, you got to actually be reading some of these pieces of legislation, these codes, these statutes, these regulations. And again, keep in mind the entire time that this crap is all ambiguous. You're never going to know 100% what the intent of the author was. But you got to know the words as they are based on this is how the system is supposed to run, so to speak. But knowing that you use that ambiguousness in your favor whenever the time comes. And it will work against them because they can't define shit from Shinoa.
Now, I'm going to show you something here. About 5 years ago, just shy of 5, July 2nd, 2018. I want you to, now, Elena, you talk about the redemption manual, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've already shown how you don't own the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you read that picture?
Yeah.
It says, we received evidence at this office that you have attempted to establish a claim against the U.S. Treasury by fraudulently submitting documents in an attempt to assert ownership over Treasury securities accounts or other funds of the U.S. Treasury. Your demand has no legal validity and is not payable through any federal or state agency. Your scheme appears to be akin to a fraud commonly known as redemption, asserting that the United States government has trust accounts linked to each citizen. They're not linked to you. You're already free. You're just not operating in your official capacity the way you should.
Which is part of the reason why when you were mentioning earlier about people renouncing the name and or whatever, Okay, that's fine, but now you're going to get full liability thrown right on you for anything and everything. The whole reason for the so-called name is for your protection in all commercial settings. It's your
Now,
protection. They assume liability when you understand that, though, but they don't, because most of the time people think that that name is theirs or them, and they have assumed liability for the whole damn thing regardless.
yeah, now look right here on the screen. This is on the FBI website. You've heard the term CPN.
Yeah.
Okay. Credit privacy numbers are 9-digit file numbers that follow the same algorithm as Social Security account numbers. Currently, federal law allows individuals to legally use CPNs for financial reporting and protects those individuals who do not wish to disclose their SSAN. Individuals who acquire CPNs are completely responsible for any debt they incur using this number. Acquiring a CPN is supposed to be a free service, therefore, websites that offer CPNs for a fee are most likely scammers. But everybody will gloss over that. What are they talking about? They're talking about Social Security numbers and CPNs. What do they say about CPNs? It says individuals who acquire CPNs are completely responsible for any debt they incur using this number. What do they not say about Social Security numbers?
That we're required to pay for the debt.
That's right.
That's what I'm saying. It's literally the opposite.
Well,
it is just the opposite, because why? Go to the Congressional Record, March 9th, 1933. Right here on the screen. March.
Isn't that the bankruptcy thing?
Yes.
Like they acquire
March,
all the debt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah.
Look right here. Under the new law, the money, singular, is issued to the banks in return for government obligations. Now, if it's their obligation, why do we keep getting in the freaking way? Let them have the obligation.
Exactly. Why assume liability for anything when they've already assumed it for you?
So I just got to figure out how to tell them that.
I would suggest that you figure out how to
teach?
not tell them. You ask the right questions so that they just automatically realize, oh, she knows who she is, and we'll just let her go, and we'll just zero out the account. Business as usual. That's part of the reason why.
What I did last year.
I was just going to say real fast, Preacher. This is the one place where Preacher and I do differ a bit, because I will do upon occasion, because I'm doing some right now, so I'm not being any kind of a hypocrite, but I don't typically like to do anything paperwork-wise. I was mentioning this earlier. I like to do it all oral. I like to be in front of the person and be asking the right questions, simply because of the fact that for as strong as some of my paperwork actually is, because of the fact that I have been targeted, my paperwork doesn't get squat for attention. So that's one of those where, again, my status has actually been altered or changed. I've passed the test more successfully verbally than I have via paperwork. And that's the only reason why we slightly differ there. But we're pretty much parallel on everything else. We're almost damn near perfectly parallel. He can cite more codes and statutes than I can, damn it. But
Yeah, actually, people are always asking me, is how in the hell do you remember this stuff? I said, blame it on God. Because I asked him to help me remember, and trust me, he did it in ways I could have never imagined.
Amazing.
But
and I went the other way and I said, I don't want to remember this. Just give me the basics so I can keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. Now, I've got some smart people in my group. I've got Boris from the Law of Boris. He talks about the usufruct, which is a fancy term for a trust. They put everything in trust. Him and I disagree on the name. He still holds to the fact, Mama gave me that. It's my property. They just put it into trust. I say no. You can't prove it's not that it's your name because why? You have no firsthand knowledge. But did they put it in trust? Yes. Private nobody in my group, very smart man, been doing it 36 years. Me and him differ on one thing. He goes through the Secretary of State. I say you should go to the foundation according to the principles in the Bible and go to the probate court. Outside of that, we agree on this same stuff too. It's all, you've got to learn who you are, and all these people out there teaching these processes, they don't even know who they are. They're coming from the aspect of that's my name. After that, if you presume that, everything thereafter is going to be flawed.
Yep.
Jesse,
everything.
What's up, buddy?
100% flawed, because as soon as you opposite end, as soon as you realize that that name is not you and or not yours, it changes everything. I assure you it does. I've been in front of a judge and I've done it.
Yep.
I've
Popeye's
said
done
to
it.
It works, I can assure you. And in fact, you can see the jurisdiction slipping from their fingers when you're doing it.
Yep.
Scramble to try and get that jurisdiction back, and as long as you stay on point, we'll continue to slip away from them.
Yep.
My name is Slim Shady.
Shady.
I know my name. It's Slim Shady.
Well, the way I did it,
Be not so Slim Shady.
the way I did it is, if I was a legal name, and I said, well, I believe there's been a mistake. I asked, what do you mean by a mistake? And I said, well, I'm led to believe that that name belongs to somebody called the Social Security Administration or the United States. And if that be true, I'm led to believe if I'm just assuming that name is mine, I'm trespassing to chattels. If that be true, I'm led to believe that if I'm using a name that doesn't belong to me as personal identification purposes, that could be considered fraud. And I certainly don't believe I want to commit fraud right here in the courtroom. Judge asked, well, he said, yes, we do. And I said, well, could it be that you could call me either friend of the court or peaceful inhabitant? And he said, okay, Mr. Peaceful Inhabitant. I said, whoa, wait a minute, brother. Where did that Mr. come from? And I did say brother. I didn't call him judge. I said, wait a minute, brother. Where did that Mr. come from? I believe it was just peaceful inhabitant. I said, okay, peaceful inhabitant. But then he went on to try and scare me into thinking that he was going to put out a warrant for failure to appear by saying, well, we'll just have to wait for Mr. Legal Name to come on in because he's the only one that could really answer these questions. And instead of saying all the snarky shit that I wanted to say, such as, really, how do you expect the sound to just wander through the door? Or are you expecting the piece of paper with ink on it, Judge? Which is it that you expect to just wander through the door? I didn't say that. I just stood there with a Cheshire cat grin on the face until he said, peaceful inhabitant, we need you to come back on such and such a date for another hearing. And I said, hey, Judge, would it be all right if I come back on such and such a date to help settle this matter with the claimant? And he said, yeah, that'd be all right. I took his order and turned it into an invitation.
He turned his order. That's right. I did that last year on a ticket slightly differently. I actually had a DOT ticket on my truck. And 12 days before court, I called the court clerk. I said, I need to speak to the court clerk. She said, well, there's 3 of us here. And I said, well, ma'am, I need to speak to the one that manages the courthouse. She said, that would be me. I said, okay, ma'am, I need to verify your EIN for tax reporting purposes because I have a debt instrument in my possession. I never called it a ticket. I said, I have a debt instrument in my possession. Oh, yeah, you got to do those kind of things. And I read the EIN, and she says, well, I can't verify that's what it is. You might need to talk to Barbara down at the town hall. I said, well, I'll get her number here in a moment. But my next question is, what's the penal sum for this instrument? Oh, I don't know what that is or how to get it. I said, I read the instrument number. She says, are you giving me a ticket number? I said, ma'am, if you believe that's what it is, that's on you. The way I see it, it's an instrument of value or a debt instrument under Title 18 U.S.C. 8. It's an obligation of the United States. And then she says, are you this name? I said, ma'am, that name is.
He dropped off, preacher.
Mm.
He was saucing it.
Hey, when you took the order from the judge, what did you do with the order?
Well, I didn't
Like,
take
what
an
was?
order from the judge. That's what I'm saying. When the judge gave me basic order or gave out a so-called order, essentially turned it into an invitation by asking the judge, hey, judge, would it be okay if I come back at such
Gotcha.
and such a date? But see,
Right,
one of the
right.
things you got to realize, too, when it comes to anything a judge says, and in fact, this is kind of an across-the-board blanket thing. Every code, every statute, every regulation, anything that comes out of a DA's mouth, anything that comes out of a cop's mouth, anything that comes out of a judge's mouth is all offers to contract. Every sound is an
I
offer to
agree.
contract.
Everything
Okay?
is a test, and they're always testing
Right,
you,
exactly.
trying to get you back in there every time.
Yeah, and
In fact,
they ask you, how do you quote unquote plea? Well, what is the definition of plea?
I believe
defend.
Pray. Definition of plea is pray.
Means to beg. It means to beg.
One of the things what's interesting is
plea,
the so-called hearing before the one that I just described. Interesting one in itself, and I didn't really until later the ramification of what I'd done, and I really should have even closed the deal, but it is what it is. I still had a lot of fun and went through the learning process, and ultimately the so-called matter was dismissed anyway. But on this one particular morning, the hearing just prior to the one that I was describing, first thing in the morning, the DA comes to me. I'm sitting there in the so-called gallery, and he asked me if I'll go out to the hallway to talk. I said, yeah, sure. So we go out there, and he asked if I'm willing to negotiate any kind of a plea deal. And I asked him, well, why would I do that? Is the claimant here yet? I'd like an opportunity to settle this matter with the claimant, such as I'm led to believe I'm supposed to, exhausting all possible legal remedy before entering into the court and creating controversy. He said, well, we don't do that around here. And so I asked him, well, who told you that? He kind of goes cross-eyed
Yeah, that's
on
not
me a
working
bit.
out.
And he says,
Like a person in my life.
Hold on, brother. Hold on. So
Nightmare called you.
Could you
Well,
mute
fuck
out if you're
about
hot
that.
micing? So anyway, as I was saying, the DA kind of goes cross-eyed and he says, we don't do that around here. And he said, well, I asked him, well, who told you that? He said, I don't know how to answer that question. So I asked him, then when can I talk to the guy that does know how to answer that question? I said, I don't know how to answer that question. So I asked him, well, what the fuck am I doing talking to you then? So now he gets all pissed off, and he goes inside and he actually amends the so-called complaint, adds charges to the shit. He was seriously pissed off. So I go in, they call the case up. The judge asked me if I'd read the amended complaint. And how did I plead? And I said, well, first and foremost, why would I read the amended complaint? What does that have to do with me? Is the claimant here yet so I can try to settle this matter honorably with them? The judge says, I'm not going to play this with you. I need to know how you plead. I said, again, plea what to who? He said, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put in a not guilty plea for it. And I asked him, great, does that mean you're assuming liability for that? This judge, without adjourning court or anything, he just bolted out of the courtroom. He ran quietly, just bolted. In fact, the wife was there. She was laughing at this whole situation. She thought it was funny. But later she asked me, hey, do you think the judge was sick or something? Do you have to go to, like, had diarrhea or something? The reason why he ran out? So I don't know. Because literally an hour later, he comes back in, clears the so-called courtroom, calls the case back up. And as I'm walking up, I'm still a couple of steps away from the so-called podium. I asked, was that a yes or a no? Ran out again, just slowing long enough to go past the court clerk and tell her to set for another date in front of another judge. And part of the reason being is if I had asked that judge a third time, the answer would have been yes, that he is assuming liability for it, because the answer is whatever I want. Because if somebody goes silent, it is considered to be consented to and or true. Which means that judge would have had to have proven to the DA how I wasn't guilty. Technically speaking, on an even higher level, when that judge first ran out of the courtroom, had I realized the scenario under the situation, essentially the sovereign had abandoned the courtroom. The captain had abandoned the ship. And had I said something along the lines of, the judge is now considered to have abandoned this courtroom, and as the only sovereign in here, I now consider this case dismissed without prejudice. And that would have been it. It would have been case closed. But the thing is, and obviously, like I said, having that next court hearing and doing what I did over the name actually taught me a whole hell of a lot too. And it was the next hearing date that the DA met me in the hallway and told me the case was dismissed and that I wasn't necessary. I didn't need to be there anymore. So, you know, it all turned out the way it needed to be anyway. But the reality is, by doing what I did, I still got a little bit more of a learning process in the whole deal. But yeah, I asked the judge, and the reality of it, that is, when that judge ran out, he was essentially saying, yes, I was assuming liability for that claim, but I got to get the hell out of here now because I can't have you ask me that anymore. Because ultimately, you got to realize too that in the essence of their positions, all these public employees, all these GovCo agents, they're actually trustees as well. Each and every one of them are trustees to the trust. And the reality is this: one of the biggest things, and the reason why the judge has to get you to claim the name, is because the name is also the trustee. Once you claim that name, you have now just claimed and asserted that you are the trustee. You just eliminated and alleviated all those other trustees in that courtroom of their obligation to perform. You just assumed that obligation onto yourself. This is why prisoners in prison are called trustees. They have to. They are the ones, they are the only ones that are obligated to perform. You're not obligated at all until you claim that name. And now they have jurisdiction because not only do they own the name, but since you claim that name to be you, you just now claim to be their property.
Wow.
Are you there? Can you hear me?
Back to my name is Slim Shady.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the reality is, you know, you can answer to anything you want, but the reality is this too: your name. How do you own a sound? Because it's not even necessarily a piece of paper with ink on it. All names began and started way back in the beginning as just sounds that were uttered out of people's mouths. The writing is simply a memorialization of what we say. How does one own a sound? Think about it. And it's not really typically us, me as the so-called legal name. I don't, or even the name that mom called me. I don't use that name. I don't refer to the self as that Christian given name that mom called me. It's always somebody else saying that name that I answer to. It's always others that are using it, not me. This is also part of why nowadays on all so-called legal documents, I sign the words, not me. I autograph the words NOTME, not me. And in the ultimate game of chess, if it ever happens to get to court and they hold it up and say, what does this say? I say, it says not me. So who in this courtroom is not me? Could it be that everybody in that courtroom is not me? Think about it. I'm leaving that position of trustee on all of them. I am not going to assume the position of trustee.
Hmm. How does it not you if you signed it and that is you?
Well, how can they even prove it? But also think about
right.
this. Think about this. There's also the thing called the holder in due course. Whoever is actually holding the document is, technically speaking, at that time, the owner.
Yeah, 9/10 dispossession. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you got a point there.
From that standpoint, you got to realize that whoever it is that's actually holding that piece of paper, they're the ones that own it. They're the holders in due course. So, yeah. And technically speaking, too, this is why I mentioned the word signature, because the autograph is actually different as well.
So jumping back to the baby and them talking about the probate court to fix this situation about the dead placenta and umbilical cord, where do they jump from that to having custody of the baby? Like when they have CPS can just come in and take kids and things like that. Where does that?
Several different ways. First and foremost,
if
you use the legal
one
name.
That's alive.
Well, first and foremost, if you use the legal name, you're using, basically, you've considered yourself to be a ward of the state. And thus any offspring is automatically ward of the state. If you have a so-called marriage license, because you married the father, you got a husband, that in itself, you told the state you are a ward of the state, and any of your offspring will be wards of the state. So whether or not you even register the baby or the event, actually, because you're not actually registering the event baby itself, because they can't actually even register people. See, that's another big thing. They can only register the events. That's why the birth certificate is hearsay. It's only registering an event. It's not registering the person or the man or woman, baby.
Okay. In her question, to help her answer this question, I think she's going with the same thing I was looking for an answer. She's like, so how do you, I just can't figure this out. But so basically you're saying that we're minors and they're like our father or our people who are making our decisions for us. That's why they can take your kid away, because you're considered a minor. But,
yeah.
Okay, but how do you become? So how do you get your name back and claim your name so you can be? Well, that's why I call it free. So
well,
you
see, number one, it's not your name. If you're talking about the name in all caps on
right.
that is
so they'll never be your name.
Well, exactly. That's the whole thing. Because that name, that all caps name with the so-called social security number attached to it, is created by somebody else. Somebody called the Social Security Administration, which is the reason why you can't possibly even prove that you are that name. But they are not going to make you prove it. They're just going to accept you saying it, because that's all they need. Because once you said it and it's on the record, especially standing in court, but it's the same thing with your so-called creditors and such. Anybody, they have to get you to claim that name first before they can actually deal with you. Because if you don't claim that name, that's the only thing that they truly can deal with. Does that make sense? Because fictions can only truly deal with fictions.
So how do we go back to the beginning and do it right the first time? Like how do you fill out those papers that they make? I mean, honestly, if you have to go to the hospital for having birth, you're a prisoner. And they don't want to let you go until you have filled out these papers. It doesn't matter what you do.
Right.
Well, I'm led to believe, and this is
getting a birth certificate. See what happens.
Well, one of the things
that stab at this one. Let me take a stab.
One thing that's happened a couple of times, and I've heard. Now, I haven't actually been there. I've just heard it said in a couple of calls where people
everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh yeah, I think we lost some people or something, or somebody dropped the.
Yeah. So before you go in for the birth, you have to express exactly what you want. If not, you're going to fall to the contract. Create your own contract in a sense, if that makes any sense. What I'm
Oh, you
saying.
have to write out what you're gonna do with the placenta and all that.
Yes, the father has to say, this is
I'll
what the
claim
name can be
this.
used for, blah, blah, blah. Because
That's my
I'm not,
question too.
yeah, no offense to the ladies or anything here, but the only competent person during the birth is the man, the father.
Yes,
Because
because
the
he's not
woman is
involved.
under duress, maybe is on
Yes.
drugs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But it starts before you even go to the hospital.
Right.
When
Okay, right
when
out.
you find out that you're pregnant, you go to your doctor, whoever, and then they make you sign paperwork for the hospital to agree to give you do the birth. In that agreement, you are assigning away the infant, which is the placenta. So it
Okay,
starts before the birth. So you have to create your own contract, basically, if that makes any sense. And if you get married, you have to literally create your own contract and go get married. So you don't need a marriage license. You would just have to create your own contract. That's how you keep the state out of it. I know that may sound weird, but.
Right. Okay, I understand the contract, the marriage. Yeah, that's but so basically before you give birth, the father has to write a contract saying that he's claiming the placenta and everything so they can't take it, right?
Well, yes, no. Now, when I have a 14-year-old son, okay, and I didn't know none of this stuff back then. And I like to joke around. I'm not too serious, I'm the guy who keeps saying my name's Slim Shady. Anyways, when my son was born, I asked him, I said, can I keep the placenta and the umbilical cord? Just kind of messing around. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Like nobody's ever asked them that. You just got to go, you got to tell them you cannot do this with the name.
Okay, so
and
did you actually do that? Did you write a contract 14 years
no,
ago?
no.
You just asked.
No, I was just screwing around. I had no idea about none of this stuff. I was just.
I got.
Sorry for the.
I got. Well, that was logical. Well, that was logical. Who somebody dropped?
Sorry
I figure somebody dropped the.
No, my wife called. She picked up the grandbaby, so she called me to fill me in.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I guess we're just having a sidebar here.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Pastor would answer the question a lot more professionally than